The Worst Witch by Jill Murphy. Chapter 7. At dawn, the celebrations ended, and the pupils flew wearily back to school, some riding double as their own broomsticks were broken. No one was speaking to Mildred. Even Maud was being very cool towards her, and Form 1 was in disgrace. When they arrived at the academy, everyone was sent straight to bed. It was the custom, after all the night's Halloween celebrations, to sleep until noon the next day. "Mildred!" said Miss Cackle in a sharp voice, as Form 1 made their way miserably up the stairs. "Miss Hardbroom and I will see you in my office first thing tomorrow afternoon." "Yes, Miss Cackle," replied Mildred, almost in tears, and she ran up the steps. As Mildred opened her bedroom door, Ethel, who was behind her, leaned across and whispered, "That'll teach you to go around changing people into pigs." And she pulled a face and ran away down the corridor. Mildred closed the door and fell into her bed, almost flattening the kitten, which leapt out of the way just in time. "Oh, Tabby," she said, burying her face in the kitten's warm fur. "I've had such a dreadful time, and it wasn't even my fault. I might have known Ethel wouldn't lend me her broomstick out of kindness. Nobody will ever believe that it wasn't me just being clumsy as usual." The kitten licked her ear sympathetically, and the bats returned through the narrow window and settled upside down on the picture rail. 2 hours later, Mildred was lying in bed, still wide awake. She was imagining what the interview with Miss Cackle and her terrible form mistress would be like. The kitten was curled up peacefully on her chest. "It'll be awful," she thought, sadly looking toward the gray sky outside the window. "I wonder if they'll expel me. Or perhaps I could tell them that it was Ethel. No, I would never do that. Suppose they decide to turn me into a frog? No, I'm sure they wouldn't do anything like that. Miss Hardbroom said that was against the witch's code. Oh, what will they do to me? Even Maud thinks it's my fault, and I've never seen HB look more furious." She lay thinking about it until she was really frightened, and suddenly she leapt out of bed. "Come on, Tabby," she said, pulling a bag out of the wardrobe. "We're running away." She stuffed a few clothes and books into the bag and put on her best robe so that no one would recognize the usual school uniform. Then she picked up her broomstick, put the kitten into the bag, and crept out along the silent corridor to the spiral staircase. "I shall miss the bats," she thought. It was a cold, dull morning, and Mildred pulled her cape about her shoulders as she crossed the yard. Glancing round in case anyone was watching, the school seemed very strange with no one about. Mildred had to fly over the gates, which were locked as usual, but it was difficult to balance with the bag slung on the back of her broomstick, so she got off on the other side of the gates and started through the pine trees on foot. "I don't know where we're going, Tabby," she said, as they picked their way down the mountainside. Chapter 8. It was very gloomy in the forest, and Mildred felt slightly uneasy, surrounded by dark trees which grew so thickly together that no light fell between them. When she was almost at the bottom of the mountain, she sat down to rest, leaning her back against a tree, and the kitten climbed out of the bag to stretch itself on the grass. It was very quiet, except for a few birds singing, and a rather strange noise, a sort of low humming, almost like a lot of people talking at once. In fact, the more Mildred listened, the more it did sound like voices. She looked in the direction of the noise and thought she saw something moving along the trees. "Let's go and have a look, Tabby," she whispered. They left the bag and broomstick leaning against the tree and crept through the tangled undergrowth. The noise grew louder. "Why, it is people talking," said Mildred. "Look, Tabby, over there, through the branches." Sitting in a clearing in the gloom were about 20 witches, all crowded together, muttering and talking in low voices. Mildred crept nearer and listened. She didn't recognize any of them. A tall, gray-haired witch got to her feet. "Listen, everyone," said the gray-haired witch. "Will you all be quiet for a few moments? Thank you. Now, what I should like to know is, are we quite sure that they will all be sleeping, or at least in their rooms?" She sat down, and another witch got up to reply. She was a small, plump witch with green horn-rimmed glasses. For a horrible moment, Mildred thought it was Miss Cackle, but her voice was different when she spoke. "Of course we are," this witch replied. "The morning after Halloween celebration, the entire school sleeps until midday. It is a rule, and the school is very strict about rules, so no one will be up until 5 minutes to 12 at the very earliest. If we fly over the wall into the back part of the yard, we will be as far away from the bedrooms as we can be, and no one will possibly hear us. Added to this, we shall all be invisible, so we shall be extremely well protected. Then all that remains to be done is to split up, sneaking into each room and turn them all into frogs. They won't be able to see us even if they are awake. Remember to take one of these boxes with you for the frogs." She pointed to a neat pile of small cardboard boxes. "We can't have even one of them escaping. Once this is done, the entire school and everyone in it will be under our control." "Is the invisibility potion ready yet?" she continued, turning to a young witch who was stirring a cauldron over a fire. It was the same potion that the two M's had made during the laughter potion test. "Another few minutes," replied the young witch, dropping a handful of bat's whiskers into the mixture. "It needs to simmer for a bit." Mildred was horrified. She sneaked back to where she had left her bag and then into the shadows so that she couldn't be seen. "What on earth can we do, Tab?" she whispered to the kitten, imagining Maud hopping about turned into a frog. "We can't let them take over the school." She rummaged through the bag and took out the 2 books she had brought with her. One was the witch's code, and the other was her spell book. Mildred flicked through the spell book and stopped at the page about turning people into animals. There was only one example given, and that was snails. "Dare I?" thought Mildred. "Dare I turn the whole lot of them into snails?" The kitten looked at her encouragingly. "I know it's against the witch's code, Tabby," she said, "but they don't seem to follow any rules. They were planning to change us into frogs while we were asleep, so I don't see why we shouldn't do the same to them in self-defense." She sneaked back to the clearing, clutching her spellbook. "Here goes," she thought desperately. The invisibility potion was being poured out into cups, so Mildred had to work quickly. She waved her arms in a circle toward the crowd of witches. This part of spell making can be very awkward when you don't want to draw attention to yourself, and muttered the spell under her breath. For a second, nothing happened, and the witches milling around the cauldron continued to chatter and bustle about. Mildred closed her eyes in despair, but when she opened them again, everyone had vanished, and on the ground was a group of snails of all different shapes and sizes. "Tabby!" shrieked Mildred. "I've done it! Look!" Tabby came bounding out of the undergrowth and stared at the snails, who were all moving away as fast as they could, which wasn't very fast. Mildred took one of the cardboard boxes and put the snails into it, gently picking them up one by one. "I suppose we'll have to take them back to school and tell Miss Cackle, Tab," she said, suddenly remembering her interview to come at noon. "Still, we'll have to go back. We can't just leave this lot here, can we?" So they set off up the mountainside, Mildred carrying the box in her arms, while the broomstick flew alongside with the bag hanging from it and Tabby riding inside the bag.